I'm Rob Grimm with RGG EDU, and this afternoon we're sitting down with Erik Almas. We've put together a pretty amazing tutorial with Erik, which is really and truly a documentary about you, your style, your workflow, how you create these amazing images, and it's available now at rggedu.com. This is one of my favorite parts of the tutorial, sitting down and talking with the photographer. Because for me and my crew, we really get to spend time with you. We spent, 12 days together on the various shoots, and I don't know how many hours on Skype and on the phone doing the pre-pro and all the post-production. But I want to invite them into your world. I want them to get to know you and your story. So let's go back to the very beginning. You are Norwegian, born in, take it away.
Born in Trondheim, Norway, and spent the first 22 years of my life there. And at that time, I had decided to study photography and came to the US, to San Francisco, at the Academy of Art University, where I studied photography for 4 years to get the bachelor. And after that, I got what's called an OPT, Optional Practical Training, and I started assisting this advertising great called Jim Erickson.
Yeah,
did that.
know him very well.
Yeah, did that for almost 3 years, and then ventured out on my own. And now, 20 years after I moved here, I have a fairly solid advertising photography career.
All right, we're going to back up. Because when I said I wanted to invite them into the world, I wanted them to really get to know you. You just ran through the whole thing really fast.
So let's take it away.
I know. Let's start back in your hometown.
Yeah.
I read that, I think it was on your bio piece, you said that photography didn't hit you immediately, it just kind of rained on you slowly. It was just kind of this stuff that kind of dripped and percolated, and then it kind of hit you that you wanted to go do it. What was your life like growing up? What was it like to grow up in what is a big city in Norway, but realistically is a tiny little town in some ways?
Yeah. Tiny town, it's 180,000 people now. Being a kid in Norway is quite amazing. It's safe, great community. It's open. Playing around as a kid at home was just leaving in the morning and coming home late at night.
Yeah.
Soccer, hockey, never really had a visual interest until I turned maybe 18, 19. So up till then was sports and music were my interests.
Tell me about your siblings.
I got 3 siblings.
Okay.
So 2 brothers and a sister.
Where are they?
They're all still in Norway.
What do they do?
2 students still. They're quite a bit younger than myself. And my sister is currently a mom, but she's in marketing and PR.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
And what were your parents like?
My parents are quite amazing. Both engineers. My mom in, now it's more environmental, but it's within oil research, which Norway is big on. And then my dad is a computer engineer.
Oil research?
Yeah, so where to find oil. She used to work with samples. Now it's more about oil spills. So all oil.
I would assume oil spills is big business these days.
It's fascinating, huh? I'm not sure how we should get into it, but all oil fields carries a DNA. So they get called in if there's oil spills, and they can determine where that's from anywhere in the world, and they can usually figure out what tanker had it and where the spills came from. And all
oh, you're kidding. Wait, back up. Oil has DNA, effectively?
Effectively, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty fun. So
I love those juicy nuggets like that. Things like what?
And here I am taking pictures. Right?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. So can you pinpoint to something when you're 18 that kind of was that first like visual cue that like, whoa, wait a minute, being in the visual arts might be something I want to do?
Okay, so I was a DJ, huge passion for music,
all right,
day and night, mixing records, and I spent my nights doing that, and then I spent a day skiing in the winter, and through that started picking up a camera to take ski pictures, friends jumping off of cliffs, all that stuff. So that's where the interest started. It was only a documentation because we saw cool ski magazines and wanted to sort of do the same.
right.
So there was no intention there other than documenting us having fun. And when I kind of hit the wall with working at night, I thought, fuck, I gotta do something else. Pardon my language.
Well, first of all, did you have some awesome DJ stage name? Like, what was your name?
No, It was before the craziness around DJs.
Now's your time to make one up real fast. Come on,
Right.
you're on the spot. Make one
It
up.
was DJ Erik A. But I mean, it's what it is.
Yeah, that's not super sexy.
Not super sexy at all.
But it's Erik with a K, so that's a
Yeah.
little better.
Yeah, that happened before DJs were the phenomenons they are today. This is 20 some years back. So then it was really just, I got to do something else. I can't work at night, can't be in the environment at night. And I started asking myself what I would do, and the only thing left standing was photography. I thought it was fun. So the intention was never, oh, I'm going to be an artist. It was just photography is fun, man. I could do more sports. I could learn this and then work for the local newspaper and shoot the Olympics and the World Championships and maybe get to travel and see the world that way. So that was
You definitely accomplished the goal of traveling. the world.
right.
Yeah.
So the intention started very different than where I ended up. But like you said, I wrote in my bio that it kind of rained on me, and it was that, and then meeting all the people on the way. Then suddenly I was just sort of embedded in this photography thing.
So how did San Francisco get your attention? Why did you decide to go there?
So it didn't really. I had decided to go to a community college in Norway that had a small little photo department.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, okay, I'll go to school and then come back and work as a DJ on the weekends. And then I meet this guy who had just moved home from the US, Norwegian from my hometown, studied at Brooks, and then went to LA and worked there for a while. Moved back again to my hometown, and he said that you can't study photography in Norway. You can't. Got to go to the US. He had an assistant who had done his research and applied to the Academy of Art in San Francisco. So he said, this is what I felt was the best school for the prices, and this is what I've done, and here's all the paperwork, and I did, and 3 months later I was on the road. So it happened really quick, really quick.
Almost no time to think. Just go.
Yeah, and I was restless at the time. I wanted something else, and it was just given to me.
And how did you find San Francisco? When you're coming from a small town in Norway, you're a European sensibilities. How did you find the entry into San Francisco, into the US?
Mind blown, really. So it's not so much about being European. It's from a really small town in Norway, right? So for me at that time was quite sheltered from any thoughts of how to create art. And then I get tossed into the Academy of Art College, where some of the first classes I take is the art prerequisites. There's symbolism and mythology, there's art history, there's all these classes where people talk about really, for me, ethereal things at the time. And I absorbed it all. I thought this was so interesting. I slept with crystals underneath my pillow. I cleansed my soul. I completely embraced the art school ambiance.
I did the same thing in Boulder. I went to college in Boulder. In fact, I got in a bad car wreck. I broke my back. I was in the hospital. I had a friend who came in and she stuck crystals under my pillow. My parents about freaked out. That's so funny.
So I moved to San Francisco. I buy a beret. I have a Carmen Gia.
Nice, like that.
I completely embraced sort of, now I'm going to be going to art school. And it was so much fun. It shaped who I am today. So I feel I got the best of two worlds, right? The grounded part that comes from being from a small town, to the ethereal exposure to all kinds of thoughts and thinking and art, that comes through going to a large art school. So it was a really good time for me.
Were you 4 years in the art school?
I did.
Okay.
So 2 years into it, I thought, okay, I'd done enough. I know enough. I could go home and work for the local newspaper. And it was actually my parents at the time that said, oh, you should finish what you started. Even though at that time I thought, oh no, I know everything, right? I should just go home. It was really a pivotal choice for me to continue then, because up till then it was all technical. 2 years into it, the creative part started, and that's when I really got into photography for real, beyond just taking sporting events. Up to that time, I'd photographed the Warriors and the 49ers and all the sports that happened at University of San Francisco, which was my neighbor. Mm-hmm. So when I continued, I really met the more advanced classes and teachers that really gave me a true insight into what photography is.
It's a good thing you stayed.
Yeah, life-changing, for sure.
You would have missed the really juicy parts too. I mean, having the technical knowledge is one part, but now understanding how to use that and how to tap into your creativity is a whole nother deal.
Whole nother deal. I talk about this when I do lectures. I had this class called Creative Portraiture, and my teacher gave us this assignment called A poetic talent of a glance. That was it. Go
A poetic talent at a glance.
of a glance, of
Okay.
a look, of a glance over the shoulder,
Right.
whatever that is. So prior to that class, the pictures are, oh, shoot a portrait, oh, shoot a color, oh, shoot a specific thing.
Right.
Then she comes and just gives us a poetic line and say, go shoot a picture of it. And suddenly you start thinking, what the hell?
Yeah.
Even now, right? You start thinking,
Right.
what is that? How is that manifesting itself in pictures? And it completely changed how I saw photography.
Yeah, immediately I started looking up and my wheels were kind of turning. They're just thinking, okay, how would I handle that assignment? That's really pretty interesting.
Right?
Because you have to key into particular words, particular emotions, and go out and create that.
It's a mind bender. So she was so clever in her approach to teaching. And that was never about, oh, shoot a specific portraits. It was shoot an emotion or shoot something that could be applied to portraiture, taking it really beyond that practical part. So from there on out, the last 2 years of school was really fruitful for me.
So how'd you get to Jim Erickson? When you graduate, how do you wind up with Jim Erickson?
So, as I mentioned, when I jumped forward, I got that 1-year working permit to stay in the US and do the practical training. And there were 3 photographers that really did well in San Francisco that we had been exposed to through school. And the 3 were Michelle Clement, RJ Muna, and Jim Erickson. And I was lucky enough to land that full-time position with Jim. So I was on staff with him for 2.5 years
As his first assistant?
as his first assistant.
What was it like to work with him? Because he's a monster in the business. I mean, I worked for a photographer here who did a similar style, and every time a new Erickson image would come out in workbook or on the, what he advertised on the back of, what was it, Archive or CA? CA forever. I mean, you could just see like, oh, I want to be, Jim Erickson. The guy's mind is pretty incredible.
Incredible guy. With that slight genius, also comes an intensity that you gotta work with.
Yeah.
So demanding, for sure. I paid my dues. I feel many times when it comes out as an assistant. But he was also very generous because he was never intimidated by me wanting to be a photographer or doing good work. He always respected me as one that wanted to be a photographer, presented me to every creative that we worked with as a photographer, and often said you should check out Erik's work. There was never any question if I wanted to borrow any equipment. It was go ahead and create the best work you can. He was always really encouraging in me doing my own imagery. So yes, demanding, at sometimes really rough on people around him, but again, really generous in the manners of photography and creating.
So you couldn't ask for a better mentor in many ways.
Yeah, for sure,
Yeah.
right? You learn the business, learn what it took, and then also, obviously, the craft of it.
So what do you think are the most important things that you learned from Jim?
Oh wow, it's hard to define that. Okay, one thing that stuck with me a lot, which was never taught in school, and these were pretty much his exact words. One of the most important things you could do for yourself in advertising photography is to learn how to speak well about your own process and pictures. So he would even let me sit in on the conference calls with clients. So I would just sit there and listen in and learn
that's great.
that whole process.
That's a blessing, because a lot of photographers would never let an assistant do that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's a little intimidating, to be honest, but again, he never was.
Right.
So being able to speak eloquently about your own pictures is truly important. And if someone that's watching this, you can imagine if an agency asks you, how is your process? How do you get to your pictures? And you say, well, I kind of just do it. They would be afraid to trust you with their work.
That gives them no confidence whatsoever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you could say that I'm drawn to these and these things because of that and that reason, and this is how I go about my process to create these pictures, there's a confidence there, and they would say, oh wow, this is his process, we could trust him to create these pictures.
And it makes them feel included.
Yeah.
Because if they're going to give you a budget, they're going to give you a job, and they're going to come in and work with you, they want to know how the process is going to go and feel included in it.
Yeah. So I learned a lot from Jim, but I think that's one of the few things that sticks out in that process, because it's so small maybe, but it's been important to me for sure.
Was there anything that you learned, not to disparage Jim, but was there anything that you learned from him that you thought, that's not something that I want to incorporate in my business? Like, I don't want to do that?
Yeah, for sure.
You don't have to say what they are. I mean, because I had that experience. I found for me, working through other photographers, there were things that, some of the most valuable lessons I learned were what not to do, along with, some of the things, what to do.
Well, me and Jim are very different personalities. So yeah, for sure there's things that he did that I would never do on my own.
One of the most important things for me when I was being mentored by Mark Katzman, he told me over and over again that art is felt before it is thought.
Huh.
Meaning, you look at something. It can be a sculpture, it can be a painting, it can be a photograph, it can be graffiti art. You feel it before you think about what those emotions are.
For sure.
And tapping into that is really the key. And a lot of people completely miss that. They want to create a cool image. They want to create something that's just amazing. I think what has completely set you apart as a photographer is you are emotion forward. You think about the emotions that you want to convey through an image. But you also do something very different. You really lead people and then leave them hanging. Meaning, in looking at your images, there's something that came before. Now we're seeing the image, and then we know that there's something that's going to come later, but we don't necessarily know what it is. So there's leaving some questions. So just kind of speak to me about that process, because I don't think it's an easy thing. I know for me, Mark kept saying that to me over and over again. And it's really hard as a product photographer to bring emotion into your work. But I think the fact that he beat that into my head made my work different, because people can connect to the fact that they want to drink my cocktails, they want to eat my food, right? When you're photographing people, you've got the access to their face and their emotion and their wrinkles and their tears and that kind of stuff. But you have the story going on. You've got the emotive, emotional story going on.
Thank you. Well, I try. That's a goal of mine for sure.
Yeah.
It's always on my mind when creating the pictures. So I'm not sure if I'm successful every time, but it's one of the things that I like to improve upon. I had some soul searching a few years back, looking at other people's work and then trying to find out what it was that I was attracted to and what I could take from that and apply to my own photography. And part of that was storytelling for sure. I think initially maybe I did it intuitively, that there was something that I wanted to say, but later on I've been very conscious about what happens before and what happens later and how I could tell a story or set my picture within a story. I think if you want to do storytelling imagery, which I think is becoming more and more important, in today's marketplace, that's a very good way to look at it. Think beyond that one frame.
So who were some of the photographers that you were looking at when you said you were looking at photographers and trying to employ some of their stuff into your work? Who influenced you?
Oh, wow.
Those are big questions.
There is,
but they're important.
And they don't have a specific answer, to be honest, because so in the beginning, when before the internet, there was the magazine photographers that I looked at, the obvious ones. A lot of that was Annie Leibovitz. Avedon, there was Gilles Benzimo, who did these fashion stories for Elle that was in black and white that I loved at the time. But then the internet sort of changed everything. Obviously the photo books, so I bought a lot of the classics, right? But then the internet flooded really the visual gates, and we just have images around us all the time.
Constantly.
And now I'm not really sure where I see pictures or where I get inspired really, because it all comes in. I look at Instagram quite a bit and I do screen grabs on my phone, and that's now one source of inspiration. There's all these photo blogs. I don't know, sometimes when I do get inspired, I just start one place and it just takes me on, drifting along Pinterest or wherever that is, right? So the true source of the inspiration now when it comes to influencers in the work, it's hard to pinpoint. It starts with me, obviously, searching for something that I want to visual reference to, and then who those photographers are. There's a few that's been amazing. There's Recuenco from Spain, who just extraordinary work. It's more theatrical than mine, for sure, but his stories are exquisite. A lot of dolls, a lot of women looking like dolls. It's just theatrically beautiful. Avedon resurfaced for me when I started looking at the traveling exhibit that he had. It's sort of, he's sort of put off as this big guy, but when I really started looking at his work, he's exquisite when it comes to human emotion. And he would lie and fight and push his subjects to encourage some sense of emotion. And I'm inspired by that for sure. I think that's another thing on top of the storytelling part that I've been inspired by and try to push my work forward into. There's the fashion guys that I love because they tell stories throughout several pictures. And Merton Marcus is part of that. Stephen Klein, even though he's dark and moody, is definitely part of that. He tells exquisite stories in his pictures. So I mentioned these fashion photographers, and maybe I'm inspired by them because I've seen them in these magazines that I subscribe to a lot. So they come to mind, but fashion is pushing boundaries, always.
Oh, it always has been.
Yeah, so I take their stories and what they do and apply it to my aesthetic, right? And it filters through me and it looks all romantic and quiet afterwards, but still, the storytelling part,
right.
Truly, if I were to pick one source, that's a long answer, but one source, it will be fashion photography, really.
Well, that makes sense. Fashion photography has always been the razor's edge when it comes to photography, to the entire
That was
sector.
a long-winded answer, and I think it came to me as I answered you. Fashion do tell stories in pictures a lot more deliberately than a lot of other photography.
Why do you think that is?
Because it's story-driven. They don't fill one page, they fill several. And for them, it's always been about emotional stories. If you look at documentaries, to pull it back to Avedon, he was sent as a young guy to go to Giza, and the fashion editor at the time told him, think about all the pharaohs and the queens that lived there in the past and channel that in your pictures. And I felt that was so fascinating because he went there with a very dreamy storytelling viewpoint. Imagine being sent off as a young kid saying, okay, imagine these pharaohs, these queens that lived there, and take these pictures.
That's a pretty lofty assignment too.
Lofty assignment, just stunning. The fashion editors have really come to light lately, especially with that movie, the September issue. They really are the unsung heroes of those stories that's being told in fashion photography. They often concept that, they find the inspiration, they storyboard it, and they bring that to the photographers that get to execute it.
Are there fashion editors that you are aware of that people should follow?
Well, Grace Coddington is the obvious one. I follow her on Instagram, but that's one picture a month. I mean, she's not really active. I would look at the September issue, that movie, and a lot of them from Vogue is in there. There's another movie on, I think her name is Veronica Vreeland, who is an extraordinary fashion editor that did Harper's Bazaar for years and years and years. Look at that for inspiration. And I don't really have any other specific names for you, but for
no,
those.
that's okay. I think people will be interested to go out and kind of see what's happening right now and who kind of the bigwigs are, that because it's something that does shape pop culture and modern culture, but you don't know many times those names and those faces behind it.
Those are such influencers, for sure. It's crazy, and I think Instagram are one platform that is really shining a light on them, so you could follow a few of them there for sure. So yeah, storytelling is big. It's getting more and more sort of infused into all advertising and definitely photography.
I think it is really and truly what photographers have to do. I think we were talking about this, that last year in 2014, there were 8 billion images that we were potentially exposed to. If you think about that, 8 billion images put out into the world through magazine, internet, whatever it is, all the different outlets. That's an incredible amount of stuff coming at us. Now, it's not that you and I saw 8 billion images, but that's the potential exposure that we had. What that tells you is, as a photographer, you have a very limited amount of time to grab anybody's attention. And if you do research on everything going on in terms of Facebook or whatever, in terms of grabbing people's attention for posts and for videos, you've got it's almost the blink of an eye, really and truly. So there has to be content that immediately grabs their attention, draws them in, makes them stay, makes them question, gets them to want more. So there has to be an emotive story.
Yeah, for sure. Either that or beauty, which has a big platform too, but it has to be striking either in story or intriguing personality, I think.
Yeah, but I think even in beauty, there is kind of a story there. You want to know something about that person, right? Or you want to at least, they're playing on the lust and the emotion, and let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
Forget it. It's not a story. It's pure lust. It is what it is. But
Yeah.
that's all right.
That too. But yeah.
But that is an
it's baffling, right? The amount of imagery that we're exposed to every day. And for us photographers, it's getting more and more challenging to stand out in that. And I think that's the true quest for every photographer now, to create imagery powerful enough to rise above that clutter.
Right.
Because it is clutter. It's all just stuff that just fills the mind and then disappears.
Yeah, there's tons of horrible stuff out there too. You're right. It's clutter. There's too much, and a lot of it's no good. I think it's hard for people to differentiate sometimes. So you have to have a story.
Agreed, for sure.
So let's go back up now that we've kind of got that part wrapped up, and we know we have to be emotive and emotional, which I think by nature a lot of photographers are.
Yeah.
When you're ready to take that step and get out of Jim's shadow and go out on your own, where were you in your life? Did you have a client base, or did you just go out and hang your shingle? And were you content with San Francisco, or were you thinking about hanging up and going back to Norway?
At the time, I wanted to be in San Francisco for sure. So I made a small run for it. Well, not a small, a really solid run for it. I freelanced retouched, I freelance assisted, I freelanced a little bit for Jim, did whatever I could to try to get work. My first few assignments were referrals from Jim, and he helped me sort of get a couple of assignments underneath my belt, and starting to slowly to do marketing for myself. Went really slow in getting any sort of traction, and a few years into it I just thought, oh, I think I had enough of this, right? I feel like I'm hitting my head against this wall that will never come down.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of resistance. And
how many years is this, by the way? Because I think a lot of people right now in the digital age just want that success right now, because everything is so immediate, and it takes years. So how long does it take?
Oh, so this is 7, 8 years into it. So 4 years of school, 2.5 years with Jim, and then I had a couple of years there afterwards. Right. So for me, I'd then been embedded in photography for 7.5 years, 8 years.
Right, which kind of feels like a long time.
Now that I say it, it feels like a long time. And the last year of it, it felt like a really long time. But when I was in it, when I was in school and then working for Jim, I had a blast. My God,
of course.
I was absorbing everything and felt like I was learning and growing. And I think today, we are exposed to the social media, which portrays a picture of successfulness that everyone wants to attain right away. When I was going through this process, I wasn't exposed to that in the same way. Right? I would see a fancy car and think, oh, I would love to have that. Or I would, see this beautiful girl with this older guy with all this dollars, and you think, oh man, I want to be able to buy girls champagne. And that kind of stuff you saw in nightclubs. But not like today where you see that shit every day, right? It paints an unfair picture of the process to reach somewhere or
Completely.
Be successful. So for me, I wasn't really thinking about that at all. I was just happy to be embedded until the end of it, where you feel like you've exhausted yourself and you just keep on pushing and it will not give in.
Right, you keep hitting the wall, keep hitting the wall, keep hitting the wall. It's frustrating.
So then I had some truly extraordinary experiences that I kind of find to be almost divine intervention, where I was deciding to go home to Norway and try to make it there. And I ended up staying in San Francisco, and then I managed to succeed, really. I had a few articles written that came out, one in CA, and I haven't really stopped working since.
So when you say you had some things that were divine intervention, define them for it. What happened that turned it around?
So I told this story in interviews before, but it's really quite amazing. I go to this magazine in San Francisco called 7x7, and I just dropped off an editorial that I shot. I thought after I'd finished this editorial, I would sort of head home, go to their offices, come down the stairs, and I walk up Grand Street right after I exit the door. And there's this Indian guy with a blue turban. And I walk past him, and he stares at me with like this crazy intent. And I walk by him, and he walks by me, and I stop, and I think, that was kind of weird. So I stop and look back at the guy. He has stopped as well. And he looked me in the eye, and he comes up to me, and he says, you really want to leave this place. But if you do, you would want to come back here, but that will be too late for you. Just stay a little bit longer, and everything you worked hard for will come true for you.
What?
Yeah. And then they start telling me about my family and other things. And I left there just elated and full of goosebumps and confidence. And
When he was telling you about your family, was he dead on? Like, was he telling you stuff that was true, or
Dead
just like
on.
prediction stuff?
Dead on. No.
So who was he?
Okay, so here's the crazy part.
Yeah.
I give a lecture at Photo Expo a few years ago.
Yeah.
And there's this Indian gentleman in the audience, and he comes up to me and I say, I know who you talk to. So he told me about this guy that is quite famous that used to travel around San Francisco for a while, other cities in New York, and he would do this. See people, get a sense of energy or whatever, and give them readings or advice or whatever that was.
So another Indian guy comes up to you and says, I know who you talk to, I know who kind of changed your life?
Exactly. Yeah.
How did he know this?
Because he's a photographer that came to Photo Expo and was there in the audience when I tell this story at this lecture.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy.
It
So
is kinda crazy.
did he tell you about this guy, his background, where he was? Have you ever met him again? Or
Yeah, so we haven't stayed in touch much, but he sent me a few emails. And the last was maybe just a couple of years ago when he sent that, unfortunately, he passed away. And this is the latest news from the guy.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable.
It is, no?
Where was he living?
I think he ended up in New York, but he was in San Francisco at the time.
Huh. Wow, that's cool.
Right?
It's kind of mystical.
The
Kind
one
of
intervention.
trippy.
I don't know. So when I tell this in the lectures that I give, I say, don't look for an Indian guy with a blue turban to make you stay on your path.
Well, usually they're red, aren't they?
Yeah. The lesson in this, right? It's not that you should look for someone to come and tell you what to do. You should just stick to the course, stick to your passions, and you will succeed eventually.
You actually did listen to him.
Oh yeah, for sure. You know what?
You didn't throw it out as lunacy. You actually listened to him.
I know this day is embedded in my memory because I walked back. I was driving a friend's white Mercedes wagon at the time.
Yeah.
And I get into the car, and this is crazy too. The first song on the radio was, I can't remember the name of it, but it's Birds in the Sky, You Know How I Feel. Sun in the Sky, You Know How I Feel. I would blast that song, and I was all elated driving through the city thinking, I'm going to make it, it's going to be so good, I'm going to stay. I was just, yeah.
And it happened.
Yeah.
So what was the job that turned it around for you? Obviously, the having this guy in the turban got you to stay. Was there a project that kicked it off that was like, that was my turning point?
No, it wasn't really, because at that time I'd shot a few decent jobs. I worked for Harley Davidson, I shot for the US Postal Service, had a few good adventures. I shot for the Copacabana Palace in Rio in Brazil. So I had a few really good assignments, but they were few and far between. And starting a business like that, it's not really inexpensive. So I was just racking up credit card debt and really didn't feel like I was getting somewhere. At the end, I was just moving my credit card balances from one card to the other and just trying to stay
Taking
afloat.
advantage of that 0% interest?
Exactly. It was kind of what I had to do, right? And at the same time, at the time I was shooting 4x5 film. So it's not easy to go in and do an editorial, right? That would be thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right.
I would shoot film for $3,000-$4,000 for every shoot that I did. So trying to create new work and market it and put it out there at the same time was tough
Yeah, it was
for
really
me
expensive.
at the time. So it wasn't one assignment that did it. It was several assignments building a body of work that eventually became big enough for people to trust me with larger assignments.
Your website is amazingly deep. Your portfolio is amazingly deep.
Thank you.
It is. There's so much imagery out there. And you obviously have a masterful eye for telling story and putting things together. One of the campaigns to me that really kind of stood out that I thought, wow, this is really unusual, is American Airlines.
Yeah. So
In some ways, that's a real departure, but in other ways, it's dead on the money with what you do. That has a lot of impact for me. Tell me about that from your perspective.
So I'd worked with McCann a few times prior. I had a good relationship with the agency. So I think that was one part to it. I'd done, for another campaign, a couple of plane pictures, which was enough for them to say, okay, he could do the planes. The initial campaign there had a combination of planes and people inside. And I think what they decided to do was to go with someone that could probably shoot the people really great and then the planes on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
The initial campaign had 4 or 5 people images, I think, and a few plane images. So there was a balance there. So they obviously looked for someone, and you said my website is deep. They probably looked for someone that had an all-round expression that could do both in the same language.
Right.
So that's how that assignment ended up with me, and then being happy with it, it expanded through almost 2 years of shooting planes several times, plane to plane, from small jet to big jet, and all the interior images that went into libraries, because they were redoing everything, right? And they were looking to
Right.
have these pictures
Completely
for a really
rebranding.
long time. So that's how that came about.
I just thought it was really interesting because some of the shots are so simple and so graphic, like just the shot of the tail, where you're just seeing a little bit of the tail, but I know it's an Erik Almas image.
Thank you.
And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's because I've looked at it long enough, but I know it's an Erik Almas image, which is in stark contrast in many ways to these very ethereal landscapes where there's a tub and a woman. And I mean, if you take those two images side by side, there's no relation. But there's a complete relation because they're Erik Almas' style through and through.
You have to say that American Airlines assignment and that stretch there was quite amazing for me, because there's only so many ways you could shoot a plane, right? If I am a landscape photographer, we have a big sky, there's a plane in it.
Right.
But when you've done that so many times, you got to start exploring. And how many ways can you shoot that plane? And you really, for me, I thought it was amazing to stay with one object like that for so long and really explore it and shoot up and down and back and forth. And where is that sort of perspective? But even though it's a close-up or it's different, I would do it with my sensibilities, right? The light qualities that I'm drawn to, the color palette I'm drawn to, all those things will be applied to everything I do, I think. So if you recognize that, I think that's great. I think mission accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you've shot campaigns all over the place for big hotels and cruise lines and giant companies all over. Tell me a couple that really stick out for you, that really felt like, okay, this client completely gets me and is letting me go. This is like my dream.
I think the top of the list, there's several ones, right?
Yeah.
Not several, there's a lot of them. And I'll try not to compare assignments because they all have things that's amazing. There's a couple that stands out. The Salt System, a company that we don't know much about here in the US, but they're France's second largest employer. So massive company in Europe. I think we did 16 images for them. And the first time around they hired 4 or 5 different photographers to do the campaign. I did 3 images. And they came back to me and said, okay, we want to continue this campaign, but we only want to use you and brand ourselves around this. And they took me to Europe several times. We shot in Africa, we shot in Mexico, we were in the Florida Keys, Miami, New York, San Francisco. I think that does it. But that was a really...
I think that does it. It's everywhere.
And they, extraordinary art director in that I bring the ideas to it, he explained the ideas behind it, and then said, you go do what you do. He would never interfere. He would at times go play golf because there's nothing I could do in this. I have given you my idea. I've given you the thoughts behind it.
Now go.
You go take the picture. So, well, obviously this comes after us working for a long time, right?
Sure.
But in the end, there was a complete trust there in that you execute my ideas, our goals for this in your vision. So, yeah, quite amazing campaign.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's what everybody aspires to have in many ways. Is this client that will just say, okay, here's my vision, go run with it. Yeah. Make my dream come true in your sensibilities.
Yep.
So you travel a ton.
I do.
How many days a year do you think you're on the road?
It varies a bit, but in 2013 I did about 270, which was a lot.
270.
270 days. Yeah.
That's a lot of time on the road.
A lot of time. So then I spend about 3 months at home and the rest is traveling. I did a little bit less last year, but still I'm in the 200 to 250 days a year range. So.
And family and friends and relationships are very important to you. You're a very connected individual. So how do how do you stay connected when you're on the road 270 days a year? That's a tough task.
Yeah, it's a tough task, and it's one of the biggest things that I feel like I've been sacrificing in my life. Really, I have some extraordinary friends that are also passionate beings who accept that I will be gone and suddenly show up and say, "Let's hang out," and we will connect as if I haven't been gone.
Right.
Family, I try to go home. Since I've traveled so much, there's a lot of miles there, and there's
Right.
a lot of benefits in travel. So I've been home 3-4 times a year, pretty much every year. So that helps. I know I have friends that lives on the other side of town and see their parents just as much as I do.
Right.
So I try to stay connected there.
Yeah, I think in your bio you said you actually still consider Norway home.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? I'm here in the US and say I'm going home, and then I'm going home to Norway, and I'm there and I say I'm going home.
Right.
So there's...
I have 2 homes as well, St. Louis and Chicago. It's a little different than San Francisco and Norway, but it's interesting having 2 places to live. I kind of like it. It's cool.
I know it's... I
So-
mean, it works for me. I'd like to be quieter for sure, but it's intoxicating to travel.
Yeah, travel is amazing.
There's amazing adventure there, and it's not just the places, but there's also the people, the art directors, the clients, the agencies. There's a lot of great people in this business.
So do you think they give you the energy to keep you from getting exhausted? Because traveling is brutal. I mean, we travel so much now, and at times it's exhausting. So how do you keep your energy up? How do you keep your inspiration up? How do you keep from just being ground down by the road?
Oh, it's not when I travel I feel it, it's when I go home. Because when you're in it, it's just this...
You're going.
You're going.
Adrenaline rush.
Yeah, and it's when I stop and relax, I get sick, I sleep, I don't want to do anything. That's when the burnout comes for a minute. And then,
Right.
Yeah, I'm never sick on the road, but often I could catch a flu or just completely go under, when it's over. So, I don't know. It's fun. See, that's the ticket. If I was dreading it, and if it wasn't fun, I wouldn't be able to do it like I do. But it is fun.
Yeah, I enjoy being on the road too.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about compositing, because you create these scenes, and it's like, oh God. Whenever people know Erik Almas's work, they just know it. I mean, you're a well-studied photographer. You are a well-known photographer. People look at your images and they go, oh my God, where is that? I want to go there. What they often don't realize is a lot of times those places exist in your mind. You have almost a Rube Goldberg mind for landscape. I mean, you can see how to put these things together. How do you think you came about developing that? And what are the things that you look for when you're thinking, all right, I'm going to put this, 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 and this? You pull like 4 different things together, sometimes more, to create one landscape.
I'm not sure where that came from. I can tell you the history behind it and how I came to it, but how... So let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
My stepfather is an engineer, and when I came to art school, they had just started the computer department at the Academy of Art College. It was one room, maybe the size of this, with just a few computers. That Mac, tiny one.
Yeah,
little,
absolutely. Right, the floppy in the front.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Intro to photography. No, intro to computers. This is a mouse. This is the computer. Software, hardware, basic, right? And then the next semester it was Photoshop. That was. So if that's my second semester, it will be fall of '95.
Okay.
Goes a long time back.
Yeah.
That's when I started my first Photoshop class. And when I graduated, I think I was one of the very first generations of photographer that was fluid in both taking pictures and using Photoshop. At the time, I felt there was a lot of either pre-press houses or other people, computer people, that came into it and adopted it first and started using Photoshop, and photographers were seeking out those people to help them.
Yep.
And I was one of those guys that kind of had Photoshop as an extension of the photography that we did, and was fluid in both languages and can really sort of push the boundaries of what the photography was. Jim Erickson was also an early adopter. He had his darkroom guy get into Photoshop right away, and he helped Jim push sort of the use of that. So I came from school being fluid in it into an environment that was early adapters of it. So when I was graduating for gym, so to speak, I had a really fluent, I felt, language, way ahead of a lot of other photographers coming out into the marketplace at that time. So I think it wasn't just me wanting to do composite photography, it was really the marketplace that saw that Erik Almas can do this for us. One of the few things I did early was to add skies, right, to make it more painterly, and I started moving pieces around. And then Amtrak came around, and it's been a signature series of mine. And they weren't my ideas, but they had me put trains on books and trains on coastline passing through a cup.
Yeah, it's a nice series.
And you asked me if there was anything that really made my career. Those pictures didn't make my career, but they really established me as a composite guy that could do things or put elements together that didn't necessarily fit. And it just sort of expanded from there. My intention was never to be, I'm going to create dreamy, weird pictures. It was really just to enhance the emotion that I wanted in my photography. But I've been taking on this career that
You do that. I mean, there is this dreamy quality of, these trains running along a coastline or on books, and then there's, this other insanely grand quality of a guy rappelling down into this cave. It's like Mother Earth is opening up for him, but it's this mossy, beautiful cave. I mean, it's just wild stuff.
Thank you. That's shot in two very different locations.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about your mind, and I think people do about your work, even though they don't understand it. You really are looking at multiple places and trying to figure out how to put it. You must have an incredible library of locations in your mind.
Yeah, no, So I think I'm just as much a problem solver as I am the guy that want to make fantastical stuff. I'm not necessarily the guy that would go, I'm going to put people... One of the first series I really did that also helped in this process was me doing this falling series. It's not on my website anymore because I don't feel the Photoshop is good enough, but I always had these falling dreams. And I did this series of pictures of girls falling through clouds. So that kind of helped me as well, but I never really set out to be the composite or computer guy. I did these things because they felt good and I wanted to create these pictures, and then advertising really embraced me in that and just helped me along in creating this stuff.
Well, I think one thing that people will really learn through this tutorial, which in some ways I hate using the word tutorial because this is so immersive and so different. I mean, you really are opening people up to your world and how you create images. But they're going to realize that Photoshop is not the driver for your imagery. You put things together and you polish it off, but there's the whole story, there's the whole pre-production, there's all of this pre-visualization that comes. And your Photoshop is kind of minimal in terms of the number of tools that you use. And because you think about the power of Photoshop. I mean, there's 200 ways to do the exact same thing. There's so many things to know about Photoshop, but really you've boiled it down to a very simple formula. And it's polishing, it's putting things together, it's enhancing, but it's not crazy trickery.
Not crazy trickery. And I made the prior tutorial, and a lot of people just went, so is this it? It felt almost like I didn't give them all or show them everything. But it comes to prove that the process I use is quite simple. It's not about creating everything on the computer. It's about having an idea that's being executed and then put together. So it really starts up front. It never starts with, I'm going to sit in front of the computer and create a picture today. It starts with, I want to create this picture that speaks to me, and these are the elements I want to come in it, and then I'm going to shoot those elements and I'm going to put them together on the computer to make and fulfill that vision. So if you follow that process and you make sure to shoot the elements right, what you do in Photoshop is going to just fall together like Lego.
Right.
And then you just massage those pieces a little bit, and there it is.
Yeah, we really enjoyed watching your process. It was fascinating. And I think people, as they watch this tutorial, where they really see how the movables are forward, meaning you always start with what can't be moved. That's the forward element in terms of creation. That's the first thing you do. And it's this building that you have, but at the same time, you allow yourself a lot of room for exploration. I mean, on all of the shoots that we were capturing of you, we were watching you and you would kind of see something else and you would start to explore a new avenue, giving yourself options in the end. So you have a good story, you have a good plan, but you're not completely rigid in it. You enjoy the process and can kind of go off in another direction a little bit.
I've seen photographers that put their stuff online, and you see they do drawings, and then they do their pictures and they look the same. And I somehow wish I could draw like that and really sort of flush it out first.
Right.
But I'm a visual guy and I'm a photographer, and I come to a place and I see some element and I think, oh, what if that was in the photograph? And what if that was a foreground element that leading the eye in it? And I somehow have the idea, but when I get to a location, I start building on it, right? There's a lot of stuff that, as a photographer, you can't stop looking. So when you get to a place and you see something amazing, right, then, oh my God, maybe this is shifting. Maybe, for the horse image, for instance, there's a few different things that happen there. The river looks amazing down here, but the cliffs are amazing up here. And how can I put those two together, right? Because the cliffs aren't as cool over here, and the river, we don't see it from up here. So it becomes me walking back and forth, shooting this piece and that piece, and in the end, I put it together. So of course there's a massaging there. There's no other way for me to do it. But as I shoot though, I know clients have been going, oh, what is he doing now? What is he doing now? What is he doing now? And I walk around collecting pieces.
Yeah.
But in that process, there's a picture forming in my mind.
Right.
And I do now use other retouchers, but the initial picture, I always put together myself, still.
Right, and then you send it off for the polish.
Yes, because the retouchers weren't there. They couldn't see what I was thinking. They couldn't just pick up all those pieces and think, oh, this is what Erik was thinking with that piece or that part. So always, it's me sitting on the computer, putting in all the pieces, adding my sort of feel and flavor, and then sending it off to a retoucher to massage it and put the pieces together.
You're right on a couple things. Photographers can't stop looking. I mean, it's my curse. I'm constantly looking at things and looking at form and objectifying things, quite honestly. I've said that many times. I objectify everything. I look at every bottle, every glass, every wall. I just see shape, and I'm constantly almost lost in it. And you talked about Avedon. He was always one of my inspirations. And thankfully, I read a piece where he had talked about the fact that he can't help himself. He will be in conversation, and then he just goes because he's looking at someone or looking at something. Something has caught his attention, and he's thinking about its form and the way light is hitting it and how he can tell its story and how he wants to photograph it. And his friends, and are fortunate enough to know him and realize he's just kind of zoned out. I thought, oh my God, that's me totally. I do that so much at the time. I can be in conversation with somebody or just constantly looking at stuff. And you've got that same quality where you can't help yourself as a photographer, but observe the world.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a blessing and a curse.
No, it's a blessing, for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a blessing.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing with young photographers today, that they get so obsessed with looking at a screen that they...
And not the world around them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And looking at a screen at a two-dimensional surface, you don't learn how light falls. You don't learn where it comes from or what causes it, right? You learn that from really being aware when you're out there. Like you and I can see how the light falls on you. And if I'm inspired by that, I can apply it to my photography later.
Right.
Often when I go to bars and stuff, theater, my God, Cirque du Soleil, for instance.
Yeah, Cirque du Soleil.
The people that light that stuff, come up with that is one of the most inspiring things that I see.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, but if you're not aware of seeing it from the lens of a photographer, knowing that you can apply that to your pictures later, that's a loss. If you're used to this and not forgetting to absorb what's there, it's...
Well, this isn't a tutorial. I mean, you talk quite a bit about depth, about bringing depth to a two-dimensional piece. Yeah. And sometimes I think people don't make that connection. A monitor is two-dimensional. A print is two-dimensional, but you have to give it depth. You have to give it the life that people feel like they're in it to experience it. Otherwise, it doesn't really resonate with them. And I think that's very difficult for people in today's generation where everything is coming at you so quickly. And it is all 2D, and it is all social media, and it's flick through your phone. That idea of shape and depth and form is almost lost. So if people really pay attention to this tutorial, they're going to see how you really capitalize on that and bring that to life.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's a big thing for me. I think creating depth into pictures that will help tell a story within that photograph is the magic ticket. At least it is for me. I mean, there's portrait photographers that only want to focus on the face, right? So that's a very different thing. So for them, it's not as applicable. But if your sensibilities are similar to mine, that's how I operate when I try to create volume in those pictures.
So let's talk about some of the things that are going on in your life now, because you've got a lot of changes, a lot of really cool things happening. You're moving.
I am moving.
Tell us about it.
So through this tutorial, right, I used the breakup that I just went through as a source for the images and inspiration. And now that I'm a single guy, I can do what I want. So I'm moving to the countryside outside San Francisco, to Sonoma, to the wine country. And we talked about the elements of travel and how exhausting that could be. And I think for me to have a respite that's quieter than a big city will be really helpful to help me recharge and get back on the road again. So I'm really craving something that's quieter. So that's number one. And then there's a curiosity about wine, you know, that happens.
Yeah, this kicked in for you as well.
Yeah, so I'm kind of excited, right? I'm telling myself that I shouldn't be distracted from my craft, which is photography, but I also think that I can be inspired in other ways, and I want to explore other avenues.
Yeah, you and I were talking about that yesterday, you know, when we were looking around my studio, and you're like, I had a furniture.
Studio envy. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. I love that Erik Almas has studio envy of me. I'm just going to say that.
It's a great place, man. Great place.
But as artists, we are inspired by those things. You know, when I renovated this place, I really got into not only designing it, but designing the furniture into it. So I had a whole furniture company for several years based on the fact that to me, it felt like art. And I think that's wine for you now. I mean, we were looking at your wine labels last night, and they're poems, and there's stories there. I mean, so wine is now your kind of new creative outlet, is it not?
Yeah, and it's not just the wine, because the way we're setting up that winery is incorporating photography and storytelling. So I get to collaborate with these extraordinary poets and musicians in creating an experience around this wine that's way beyond just the wine making, but it's an collaborative effort to put images to words that describe an experience around wine.
You better I'm one of the top booze photographers around, so you better let me take some shots of your wine. Yeah. I'm just going to say that out loud.
Yeah. No, for sure. I'll send some your way.
That's cool.
No, I'm really excited about it. And I think creating community and being around people that inspires is really important as well. I think photography is almost a solitary endeavor in that you got to push and you got to create. So to not only look at other pictures, but other forms of art and maybe participating in the other art is helpful. Right.
So you've certainly achieved quite a few of your goals, and now you've got your life kind of moving into a new direction as you move out to Sonoma. You're still going to be traveling and have a lot going on. Where do you want your career to go? Do you have kind of like a roadmap or even a sketch of where you think your career and your life is going to go over the next decade?
Wow. That's the big question. The next decade, huh? Okay, so I do have some ambitions, both for life and photography. We talked about this a bit, but I see photography changing quite a bit. Not the images created, but the way it's used in marketing. Mm-hmm. So I think this traditional model that I've been really embraced by and been really grateful for is changing from the traditional advertising model into influencers that help push the marketeer's message out there. So I think there will be less of the work that I do today. So I want to try to adapt for that and, try to be one of those influencers for one, and then do other things that excite me that could help keep my photography fresh and relevant. It's tough to do photography without exercising it every day all the time. I think if I stop today taking pictures, I'll probably be irrelevant within half a year.
You have certainly achieved a lot of your goals, and now your life is kind of moving in a new direction as you're moving up to Sonoma. Have you kind of mapped out what you want to do over the course of, let's say the next 10 years, the next decade? Where is Erik Almas going to go?
A big question.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
It better be a big answer.
All right. So in 2007,
Yeah.
I worked with a coach, and he had me put down my ideal life. And I look at that every now and then, and still not that far off. Monetary-wise, is a little bit to go, but in short, that says that I would do about 8 commercial assignments a year, which would be enough to have fun and make enough money to have even more fun.
Good.
That there's gallery representation, that I do more fine artwork. In 2007, I said there was a house in San Francisco, a house in the wine country, one in Norway, and maybe one like a place like Italy. And as it is now, I got a couple in San Francisco and the one in Sonoma, so I could work my way towards Europe when I get older. Then obviously there's the family part and all that stuff in there as well. So I'm getting closer. I don't think I want to do things all that different. I just want to get better at what I do. I want to explore new things, obviously, but I still want to hone my craft as a photographer, travel less, but that would maybe allow me to explore deeper and do more. So I think as I do less commercial work, I will hopefully get better as a photographer. As I get better as a photographer, hopefully I'll get to reach some of the photographic goals that I have and some of the clients that I want to work for. So I just realized, right, I'm becoming one of the old guys now in photography. I never considered myself that guy. I was always the young, hungry one, but now I'm kind of getting...
No, you're getting there.
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
So, but I still have a fight in me. I still want to create new pictures and still want to do good stuff. It's inspiring, honestly, to have this really competitive marketplace.
Yeah.
Because I would probably get lazy if it wasn't. If I was super busy all the time, just push, and making all the money in the world, then why would I create new pictures? Now there's a competitive marketplace. There's youngsters coming up that create extraordinary work, which makes me sort of sharpen my tools to make sure that I, one, execute, two, do it better and be conscious about the things I want to allow myself in.
Well, you still have the desire to learn. You still want to improve your craft, and even though you're considered a master at what you do, you view that you've got more room to grow.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely.
Oh, my
which
God.
I think the intelligent people do. They have
Yeah.
that capacity, first of all.
The better you get, the more you realize. It's a classic one,
Yeah.
right? You realize that you know quite little. And photography, I
Right.
realized, is such a rich medium.
Right.
It's extraordinary. Yes, one thing is to create beautiful pictures, but to create beautiful, impactful pictures, I mean, it's very few photographers that really have done it well. I don't think I'll ever get there, but I mean, if
What are you talking about? You can make completely impactful images right now that are stunningly gorgeous.
All right.
You're already there.
Okay, thank you.
Just so you know.
An amazing compliment, right? But there's no books by Erik Almas on the shelf yet, so that's one goal, right?
Right.
I talked about that part. So there's still great, crazy mountains for me to climb, professionally and visually. And if you look at, as I was about to go there's very few photographers that really does this extraordinarily well. I would say there's 30, 40 photographers today. I don't think there's that many more that really create images that is, I was about to say sophisticated, but emotionally powerful, that just makes you stop, that can do this consistently. There's an intangible quality to their work that is just beyond what most photographers do.
And that's the key, is to make people stop.
Exactly.
In a world where 8 billion images come at us a year, where you're given a millisecond, you got to make people stop.
I can do way better. I want to do better. So,
which truthfully, that's a phenomenal lesson for our audience, our students, to really ingrain in their head, that even someone who they view as one of the greats is still sitting here saying, I can do more, I can do better, I can push myself further, I can learn more. You don't stop.
So I think for me, right, having established what's the core of my photography, because the images you take should always be a projection of who you are, and the pictures I take are consistently having the same feel or flavor, like you mentioned there, Erik Almas tone to it. So that won't change, but there's the impact that the pictures have and the people that's in them and how I connect with them and all that stuff can change, for sure, can get way better. So I think for someone starting out, they will probably progress like this, right, and get a lot better, a lot quicker. For me, it's the fine-tuning of it. So if I'd done this, now I want to do that and that and that, and just slowly, hone my craft to become better at what I do.
Do you think that there are new ways you want your clients to challenge you, like going forward? Like, what do you want your clients to throw at you? How do you want them to challenge you?
Oh my God. So that's the thing, right? Clients don't really challenge me.
Interesting answer. All right, good. Let's expand on this.
So 99% of the clients come to me to execute their ideas with my vision. And I'd like to say that whenever I get client work, it's me looking backwards, repeating what I've done. So to push myself forward, I would need to do that myself so that I can come over here and again then apply that to client work.
Right. Great way to think about it.
Rarely, but for the one example I told you and a few other art directors that I worked with for a long time, will I get assignments where they say, man, Erik, we love your work, but why don't we just push it somewhere else where you're not?
Right.
That will rarely happen. It will definitely not happen on really big accounts. At that level, there's so much accountability, there's so much research and focus grouping done prior to it coming to me. So for them to depart from, essentially they research photographers that will fit their mission and what they want to accomplish, right? So they won't pick me as a photographer and then say, oh, why don't you go push yourself and do something else or different?
Right.
At the level of marketing that I do, that doesn't really happen. So the pushing forward I have to do on my own and then put that out there and they can say, oh, Erik Almas is doing some new interesting stuff, and that could be then applied to new assignments or new clients.
You know, really and truly, I think you put into words something that I didn't even realize in some ways. I guess clients in many ways really aren't challenging us because they are looking at our work and they want to know you can execute their needs. They don't want to take a risk, particularly with big budgets. So as a photographer, as an artist, whether you're a poet or a painter or a photographer, you've got to challenge yourself.
Yep.
You've got to create that set of challenges to push yourself, and then, your clients are actually going to have you work backwards.
Yep. You need to push and explore on your own, and the clients will look at that and say, that looks amazing, let's apply it to our advertising.
Right.
Unless you have editorial clients, which I think are very different. So Genlux is a magazine that I worked with for a long time, and the art director there, Steven, he is truly hands-off, but he is a artist in his own right, and he helped push ideas and tone and set the stage for it and then let me execute. So the editorial platform is very different. There you can have clients that will really push you. They can say, your photography is amazing, here's our ideas and go do it. And then you can apply and push forward. So for editorial, that happens. And for me in my career, I don't do enough of editorial. I would love to have the time to really dedicate to push that more.
Put that on your goal list for the next 10 years.
It is. And then there's the other way around, because a lot of the editorial photographers want to make more dollars and they say, oh, we want to do more advertising.
Right.
But a balance of the two, I think, is the ticket, where you can push creativity in one and then obviously have people hire you to do that creative work for them and look backwards a bit. So.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Well, I got to tell you, I have enjoyed every step of this process. Watching you work has been really quite remarkable. Your process is fascinating and got me thinking in a lot of new ways. And I know that the students and our audience who are watching both this interview and who get a chance to immerse themselves in what we're calling a tutorial, but really and truly is this immersive experience where you've really opened your door. The door to your creative world, to your process, to your emotion. You've kind of put this thing out there in the most personal way. You have not held back on any of your tricks, any of your tips. You really put it out there. So thank you for doing that. I think it's a real gift that you have given everyone, and we're glad that we could be a part of this.
Thank you. I just actually realized when you said this, so I assisted Jim, right, that was not afraid to share.
Yeah. I
think maybe that's my way of contributing back and passing that on, because he was unafraid in sharing and I shouldn't be either. So
it makes the community better. It makes the business stronger. That's the whole reason we're doing this. It's so hard for people to know how to create these images, how to do what they need to do to climb the ladder in this business. And I think as older photographers, which I guess we get to call ourselves now.
I don't want to.
I'm older than you. Yeah. I think it's our responsibility to show people how to make this business work, to teach them our tricks, and to not fear them, to realize that they're not going to be our competition tomorrow. They don't have the skill set yet, but we can bring them along. We can create a really solid photographic community of a great new generation of photographers.
And I don't think they'll be my competition either, in
Right.
some ways, right?
Because you have your own style.
Exactly.
Right.
By the time you are as established as I am, if you apply all the things I could teach you, then you will apply that to yourself, and you yourself will be projected in those pictures, and they won't be the same as mine anyway.
Right.
So in some sense, there's no competition between artists in that way. We all have our different sensibilities.
Right. Well, thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.